kind of been given a green light to remove maybe some impact areas or some outcomes from their pre-existing strategic note and AWP? And the answer is yes. We want officers to focus, and we want officers to really try and focus on a smaller number of areas where they really feel they can have an impact, and ideally they can implement flagship programs, and that they can mobilize resources, have really meaningful strategic partnerships, deliver results, and then reach also economies of scale and improve their management ratio of their office. So if doing that means that you need to move from working in 5 impact areas to working in 3, perhaps by folding some work from one into another or something, then we would recommend that you look at that. The only proviso, of course, is you must honour any cost-sharing agreements that you have signed, or else just reach out and attempt to renegotiate them if need be. The second thing is that, of course, if you have a very large, very financially successful program where you've mobilized a lot of resources, we would expect you not to close it down if you had a lot of non-core resources in it, and because we're really keen to make sure officers continue to have those who have a healthy management ratio continue to have a healthy management ratio. But essentially, otherwise, if you have some work, and I know there are a lot of offices like this, where they're working on 1 or 2 of the impact areas where all they're putting in is 50 or 60,000 of core per annum, then you should feel, in fact, I think as representatives, it's the representative's job in consultation with the regional director to make these kind of strategic decisions about prioritization and try and consolidate those resources to really reach kind of a impact level programming in a smaller number of program areas. So what that means in terms of the strategic notes and the AWPs is that if you have a new strategic note for 2016, it's quite straightforward because you're doing a new program document anyway, so you're reflected in that. But we're being kind of flexible, and I think exhibiting a lot of common sense this year, in that if you're just doing a new AWP for 2016, you can also reflect these big changes in that AWP. It'll be discussed in the peer review group meeting, and if the AWP is approved, you can consider it then a de facto approval also of the corresponding changes to your results framework in your strategic note. And then you have time next year or the coming months to then revise the strategic note to reflect the changes that were approved when your AWP was revised. We're doing it that way because we have this principle that we try to stick to whenever possible of not requiring officers to have the same thing approved more than once. So that's why we're trying to do it that way. So we would expect to see officers, even if you're not adopting a flagship program initiative, just in terms of improving the quality of your program, we would hope that you would look to try and focus on fewer areas if possible, or consolidate some of your work and impact areas together. Okay, so I just wanted to get that very important message out of the way because I was asked by a couple of people to highlight it. Now, moving forward towards the clinic, of course we have a lot of people online again, so we would like everyone to keep their microphones muted if possible, and to, if you have any questions, to type them into the conversation section of the view of the Skype software, and just like we did last week, we'll try and go through those questions one by one. So please go ahead. So, okay, well, no one's asking a question yet, so until I see something, I'll just keep talking. How about that? So one other thing that I'd just like to highlight is that a number of officers have said... Can you
ask them whether they can hear you? I mean, I hope that...
yeah, can you hear me? It would make a lot of sense if you couldn't hear me.
Yeah, because nobody's responding back.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Ah, okay. Yeah, wow, yeses, okay. After all that, that's quite a relief to know. I don't have to do all that again. Okay, great. So just one other point then before you start asking questions. It just relates to management ratio and expectations in terms of flagship program initiative integration. I have had some people sort of discreetly asking whether is it possible to look instead at flagship programs for 2017 instead of this year, and do we really have to adopt flagship programs? And so what I want to just raise and bring out is something that isn't the guidance note, and it really has relates to the management ratio of your office. And I think certainly the planning and coordination specialists and the regional offices have the management ratios of all of the offices in your region, so they'll have the management ratio of your office. We're trying to improve the management ratio of the organisation overall, but also of specific offices, to look into the sort of financial sustainability of the business model that we have at the moment through the regional architecture and through your offices. And we want our offices, of course, to be mobilising sufficient non-core to really complement the allocation of IB if they're getting IB and core. So what we want to do is try and get all of those ratios in at least have a kind of a plan or a strategy to get those management ratios into a healthy state. Now, the flagship program initiative is one means of trying to do that. So it's not just in a very abstract sense about greater impact and more resources. It's very, very specifically tailored also to try and enable you and give you the tools that will allow you to put your office on a more financially sound footing. So what I would say to offices who are saying, you know, do I really have to look at these flagship program initiatives, or do I really have to integrate them? Well, firstly, everybody has to look through them, because it's the way the organisation is going to be working really and investing from now on. But secondly, in the immediate term, I think in the peer review group meetings, and when your plans are looked at in the final analysis in headquarters, we will be looking to see whether the budget that you have and your resource mobilisation plans for next year are sufficient to improve your management ratio. So if we have a situation where we look at a strategic note AWP, and an office is really still operating very much at a very low base, and they still have a not very good management ratio, the natural question would be, well, why didn't they look to try and integrate a flagship program initiative and get all that headquarters support and muscle behind resource mobilisation if they had a bad management ratio? Why didn't they adopt that as a solution? Now, I'm just saying that would be the question. Then it's entirely, maybe some reps and regional directors will have very good answers to that question in the case of some offices, because we know offices are all in different places. But I would just say that would be a question, and it would be a question that I would advise every office to have a good answer for if they're coming in with a proposed budget for 2016 and a resource mobilisation target for 2016 that doesn't represent a strategy for dramatically improving any poor management ratios. Sorry, I know that's a mouthful, but I think you probably get the idea. The flagship programs are one thing they're designed for is improving management ratio. So if you have a bad management ratio, you need to be, and you're not adopting flagship program initiatives, we hope you'll be able to give an account of why. So that's the second point. And just one other third key message, if I may, that has also come up. We want to make clear that when we're looking at the flagship program initiatives and integrating them into strategic notes and AWPs, we're going to try and be vigilant and urge the regional offices also to be quite vigilant for any sort of cosmetic exercises. So we want offices to really be looking at these theories of change, and although they're at liberty to customise them, particularly the result statements and the indicators for their local context, there's two things that you really have to bear in mind as a minimum. The first is, three really. The first is, in the PRG meetings, the office, if they're saying that they're implementing a flagship program initiative, should be able to relate what they're planning to do in their program for 2016 to the original theory of change developed corporately, and where there are some differences in language and so on, they should be able to explain it. But they should, of course, be able to explain how their program is a reflection of the corporate logic or the corporate thinking on that area of work. So secondly, linked with that, that means also that the one thing that you really have to pay a great deal of attention to when you're looking at these theories of change is the sort of if-then statement, the sort of mini theory of change in between output and outcome level and outcome and impact level, because that is what really represents, those sentences really represent the organization's thinking, our sort of hypothesis in terms of what will bring about change in that area. And we need people who are adopting flagship programs to be completely on board with those kind of statements, and their results, even when localized, should reflect that thinking. Because this becomes the means through which we plan to learn as an organization. Because some of these theories of change, they're all going to be wrong somewhere along the line. No theory of change is perfect. But we need to become more of a learning organization who will then use what you're doing and the data you're gathering to try and see, well, actually, maybe a year or 2 or 3 years from now, we'll be able to amend some of these if-then statements based on the real evidence and data we have. And the third thing, very simple, is you will be asked, of course, to adopt at least one of the outcome level indicators from those theories of change in the results management system when you enter your plans in early 2016. Okay, so let me see if I can find some questions, hopefully some questions that some other people can answer, because I'm starting to get a dry throat. Okay, so I'll scroll back up. I can see there's been a flood of questions once I started to talk. And okay, so first question we have here is from Fumi Nakamura in Istanbul. So Fumi says, for $1 million requirements among middle-income countries, if those offices cannot propose 1 million, that means that they cannot call their program as a flagship program, even if they are adopting a flagship program. And what would be the implication in the RMS at the later stage? Will these not be counted as flagship programs in the RMS? Is that correct?
I can maybe take the first part. Thanks for that question. The short answer is yes, it won't be considered as a flagship. And the reason is, we have to remember one of the aims of the flagship programming initiatives is to increase the level and quality of non-core resources for UN Women. So this is a strategy for increasing our mobilization of high-quality non-core resources. So the 1 million is to ensure that we use the flagships to be able to do this. If not, we run the risk of exactly what you just mentioned happening, where officers will take on the theories of change, but will not. There's a risk that then they may not use that to increase their resource mobilization. So certainly the short answer on whether we would consider it a flagship would be no, because it would be great if you use the theory of change and that's helpful. But if it's not going to contribute towards increasing the level of non-core resources for UN Women, then it's not meeting one of the criteria of a flagship program. I'll let Shane respond on the RMS.
Okay. On the RMS, we're still constructing that particular feature for me, so I'm not sure in what order people will do it, whether we'll see the budget first, or whether they'll be asked the question about FPIs first. But I mean, ultimately, regardless of whether people get the choice in the first instance or not, the monitoring and view that we're building for the flagship program initiatives, which will allow headquarters to see across all of the flagship programs globally and regionally, that will then be built to exclude anything that doesn't have, I think, the requisite scale. Now, just one point I'd like to add is that even if an office like a middle-income country, for example, thinks that they can't get to the million, they think they may be dramatically off that, like 300,000,
yeah.
I think it's still good that you use
course.
the flagship program initiatives.
Of course. I mean, yeah, I should add indeed that, we're talking in the ballpark of 1 million. So if it's not 1 million on the dot, that's of course fine. If you're 200,000-300,000 off, that's fine. But we need to be able to see that there is an effort to scale up that is being made. So the 1 million is a ballpark. It needs to be around that. If it's a few 100,000 below that of course is fine. But there needs to be a visible effort of it being of there being a scale up.
Thanks. The next question is from Sunita Kaminya. Has there been any development with output level indicators for FPIs, and are these posted somewhere?
Yes. So if you look at the if you look on the intranet, on each of the 12 individual sites, each flagship has its own page The first point on that page is the draft flagship brief, and that is the full internal brief that goes back to the booklet that was shared in preparation for the global retreat, which includes for each flagship initiative the background, the theory of change, the SWOT, the means of implementation, and finally a draft development results framework, the DRF. For all of them, they have all completed at least the indicators at the goal and outcome level with the support of data and research here in New York. For many of them, they have gotten to the output level, but not all of them. But that is a work in progress. So my suggestion would be to go to the flagship page that you are interested in, have a look at that brief that is there, look at section 5, which is the DRF. If the output indicators are not complete, I would suggest that you contact the focal person whose details should be also available on that page and ask them where they're at in terms of the output indicators. We'll be making an effort for all of them over once the GA is over here in New York to ensure that everybody completes this to the output level. But in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to the focal point. And if for any reason you have any issues either in finding it, or you need a Word version, or you're not sure who the focal point is, please feel free to contact me.
Great, thank you, Fiona. Next question is from Juliet Banafi in Mexico. She says, hello, for Mexico, we would like to put 2 flagships in our annual work plan, but it's not realistic in our context to pretend to mobilize $1 million US for each. What can we do?
So I think this goes back to the first question, to Fumi's question. Again, we look at $1 million as a ballpark, so if it's a few $100,000 less here or there, that is okay. But there does need to be an effort to ensure scale up. So of course you're welcome to use the theory of change and all that comes with it. But there is a question of how far off the million are you? Because as I said, one of the objectives of the flagships is that it is a key strategy for increasing UN Women's resource mobilization of quality non-core resources. So there are different objectives. One of them is, of course, to ensure that we are consistent and coherent and that all our programming is underlined by a strong theory of change. But another objective is also that it is a resource mobilization strategy. So perhaps you want to maybe share around what ballpark you're thinking of, and we could advise in that regard.
Okay. So I take it we'll extend that opportunity to everybody.
Yes.
If you want to. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So then I think we had the same question from El Salvador. So I think El Salvador, the same response to you. A question from Jennifer Cooper in Panama. Hi, Jen. It says, my question is in relation to resource mobilization for the flagships and the various responsibilities at the country, regional and headquarters level.
That's a very good question, Jen. Hi. So the division of responsibility between headquarters, regional and country level will also depend on the type of implementation modality that a flagship is going to be operationalized through. For most of them, we expect them to be similar to the example that you will see on the agriculture site, in the sense that we expect there to be at global and regional level what we're calling a global policy support project that covers things around technical assistance, quality assurance, knowledge management. But the actual implementation of activities is carried out through a portfolio of country projects, and each country project has an associated country project document that is used to mobilize resources at country level, keeping in mind that 80% of non-core resources are decentralized to the country level. So that would be for most of them. There will be some of them where the operational modality may be through global programs. For example, EVAO, there is a global joint program that is currently under design. And they have, I believe, countries perhaps in mind. Similarly, for data, they may have a global program for a component, the component on methodology. And here for global programs, most of the responsibility will be at headquarters and regional level, because the money is mobilized globally, originally, and then transferred to countries. The third modality is the financing facility, and thus far we have one under design for peace, security, and humanitarian action, the Global Acceleration Instrument. And for this particular one, again, the mobilization effort will mostly be at headquarters level. Having said that, even for the ones that are at headquarters level, headquarters will only ever be able to provide a seed money to country offices, given then that they need to cover quite a number of country offices. So what countries should really be thinking about is how to combine different sources of funding. So, for example, if it's peace and security, a country office should be looking, okay, through the Global Acceleration Instrument, headquarters will mobilize certain resources that I could get through that. But at country level, I should still be able to use my project document to potentially be able to raise money locally. So in a sense, it's not mutually exclusive, but rather should be complementary, in the sense that the division of responsibility is also in terms of budget lines, that headquarters and regions can tap into the budget lines of donors that they have set aside for global programs and regional programs. And countries should be able to tap into their resources that they have decentralized and can only provide at country level to country programs. And in with regard to coordination of that and consistency, as we said last week, and as Yannick has said before, it's okay if we go to donors, different donors or the same donors with similar programs, as long as we're consistent in how we approach these donors and as long as we share that information. So we discussed also last week with SPD here in headquarters that we would like to be able to set up a system to be able to share information, so that if Malawi goes to SIDA on agriculture, that information is available, so that if Tanzania goes to SIDA on agriculture, they have some kind of intelligence about what was the reaction in Malawi and so on. So we're also looking up at setting up some sort of coordination in that regard. But as long as we all go to SIDA with one theory of change and we're consistent, that should be good. I hope that answers your question, Jen.
Okay, so we'll move on, and then Jen or anybody else, if you feel we haven't answered your question, just type at the end. But I think we're doing pretty well. Okay, so there's a question from Florence in Dakar. What is the mandatory level of alignment on a flagship program? If we want to implement one on a country office AWP, should we keep the same outputs as we used to do in the UN Women Strategic Note outcome and outputs? Okay, so that's a good question. So just to go over again, what does it mean to integrate a flagship program initiative? So the first thing is, let me begin maybe by saying what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean cutting and pasting any results or anything from a flagship program, TOC or DRF, into your strategic note or AWP. So it's not that. It doesn't mean looking at what you have in your current program and just writing, flagship program at the top and trying to say that there's an EVA flagship program and I'm doing EVA work, therefore I'm going to call my work the EVA flagship program in my country. So it's neither of those two things. So what is it? Well, what it means is you have looked at these flagship program initiatives, you have looked at the theories of change there, you've looked at the criteria that has been provided in the presentation that is on the SharePoint site that gives you criteria for selecting a flagship program initiative, and you've looked at the guidance also in the SN guidance note on selecting priorities, and using those you said, okay, these 2 or 3 flagship program initiatives are relevant to my context. Then you really need to sit down as a country office and look at the theory of change and look at the logic of the theory of change. So if you have a theory of change, for example, on EVA, And maybe, actually I have the theories of change here, so if you bear with me, maybe I'll actually just get it, take it out. So I have the one here, Women's Political Empowerment and Leadership. So if you're a country office and you look at the theory of change in women's political empowerment and leadership, and you look at it and it says, okay, so the goal TOC statement is if electoral frameworks and arrangements promote gender balance in elections, if a cadre of interested, diverse and capable women leaders is formed, if women are perceived as legitimate political leaders as men in society, and if women are promoted as leaders in gender-sensitive political institutions, then women will be politically empowered and realise their rights because women will have political agency and lead in decision-making. So if you look in the first instance at that sentence, because that's probably the most important sentence in the whole theory of change, if you look at that and say, for example, Florence, you're doing it in Senegal, and you say, okay, that sentence, that logic, that results logic, that theory is completely applicable in Senegal. So when I look at Senegal and I try to figure out what would it take to have greater political participation and empowerment of women in Senegal, that makes complete sense in this local context, because I know that here in Senegal, if we did change electoral frameworks and arrangements to make them promote more greater gender balance, if we were able to establish a cadre of interested, capable and diverse women political leaders, if we were able to change perception of women and make them perceived more as legitimate political leaders, and if we were able to have them promoted in certain institutions, I'm confident that in Senegal we would be able to have women who are politically empowered to realise their rights, and so on. And once you say, yes, that makes sense in my local context, then you can start to say, okay, so if that makes sense, then maybe there's bits of it that are already done. So maybe you already have that electoral framework in place in Senegal. So you say, I don't need to do that. Maybe you already even have a cadre of interested, diverse and capable women. So you say, I don't need those two pillars of that theory of change. What I see when I look at Senegal is that the third and fourth one are still missing here. So there's an issue of them being perceived as legitimate political leaders, and there's an issue of them being promoted. So I'm going to take on those two pillars of the flagship program in my country, and I'm going to turn them into a flagship program project for my country. I don't need to do the other two because they're not an issue here. So that's how you can contextualize or localize that theory of change by saying, for us actually the theory of change in Senegal just has those two big pillars, and that sentence just has 2 points rather than 4 as premises for the change to happen. Now, once you have done that, then you might look at it again and you might say, here's what's really interesting. In Senegal, we already have a project that really is about number 3. So it's about, we already have a big project about changing, about women being perceived as legitimate political leaders in the country. And we already have a $300,000 a year project. So what we're going to do is we're going to complement that with this other part, which is the 4th pillar. And we're going to have that $1 million a year program, or close to $1 million a year program in the country, based on pillars 3 and 4 of the theory of change. One part of which is based on previous programming, but that is completely aligned with the TOC, and the other pillar is not. You may also look and find that you have some previous programming in, for example, women's political empowerment and leadership that isn't relevant to this theory of change. You can't bring that into the flagship program initiative unless it really makes sense within the context of the organization's theory of change. So once you have done that, then you can come up really with your own version of the outputs and your own version of the outcomes, or even different outputs in particular. You can certainly do that based on the local context. So you're not required to take anything verbatim or word for word from that theory of change. But if we sit in a peer review group meeting, and I'm sitting across from a rep, and I say to that rep in Senegal, you say you're doing the Women's Political Empowerment and Leadership Program, can you explain how you got from the corporate theory of change to your program and how your program fits in with the corporate theory of change? I would expect her or him to be able to explain to me, well, I looked and I thought part 1 is already there, the electoral frameworks are there is already a cadre of interested women and so on, so it was 3 and 4, and I already had a bit of a program in 3, but 4 is completely new and based on the flagship program initiative. And then we'd say, good job, that makes total sense. If the outcome outcome statements are different or the outputs are different, that's not the biggest deal. The biggest deal is whether you're following the kind of thinking of the theory of change and the flagship program initiative. The only thing that you're going to end up with verbatim, word for word, is in the results management system when you're entering your AWP and your strategic note for 2016, you will be asked, you will be required to adopt, just like you do with the strategic plan, for example, you'll be required to adopt at least one outcome level, not output level, just outcome level indicator, and track that for the organisation. Because of course if we're implementing, say for example, the Women's Political Empowerment and Leadership flagship program initiative, if it's been implemented in 20 countries around the world, we want to be able to say what on aggregate terms we are seeing in terms of outcome level change across those 20 countries. So if we get those 20 countries using one or two of the same indicators, that will allow us to do that. So that's the only thing we're going to be pushing on to people. Okay, so I think that's the most elaborate and detailed explanation I've ever given of that. I hope it helped clarify things, because I know there's still questions out there. Okay, so moving on, then we have a question from Jennifer Cooper. She says, I want to stress in relation to the above that the flagship initiatives is a fantastic way to mobilise resources, but we really do need to bear in mind very distinct realities, and hope that particularly in middle income context and donor orphan contexts, that we can count on cooperation with headquarters for resource mobilisation. This is the way that other UN organisations are doing it in similar contexts, due to the cost-benefit analysis of mobilising resources where they are not plentiful. Okay, I think what we will note that. We can pass that message on to Yannick, I think, and Maria Noel. It's not so much a question, but I think it's an excellent point. Okay, so we'll pass that one on. That there are particular issues in certain regions and certain middle-income contexts, and that you think that there really needs to be a different approach from headquarters, and a different kind of support from headquarters for middle-income countries and on donor orphans than there is for lower-income or crisis countries.
I should just add that in middle-income countries, we may also, I'm not sure how much UN Women does this, but also look at domestic cost-sharing agreements, and on specific areas where we come in with very strong methodologies and tools, for example, on gender-based budgeting, or what will be the data program. I think their governments will themselves have an interest in middle-income countries to actually cost-share with UN Women. So I think we need to look beyond traditional donors in these contexts towards governments if we have a strong value proposition for them. So I just wanted to emphasize that in middle income contexts. We are also looking at headquarters to increase our cooperation with foundations, and I know economic empowerment is also looking at strengthening our partnership with the private sector. But indeed, Jen, your comment is well taken and noted. But I would just want to also encourage colleagues in these contexts to look beyond traditional donors, because indeed it's unlikely that at the global level, at the regional level, or at the country level, that traditional donors for certain middle-income countries is going to change much.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. So, a question from Fumi in Istanbul. Following the first clinic, can you please elaborate further on what headquarters' plan is for the analysis of flagship program data and the aggregation of data across all flagship programs in the results management system? If each office has an option to select only one flagship program outcome indicator at the end, it's more likely that there is no flagship program common indicator at the global level that would allow us to aggregate data across all flagship programs per thematic area. That is the plan, question mark. So I think for those of you who aren't sort of steeped in the RBM logic, like myself and Fumi, who talk about these issues a lot, I'll just explain that to everybody else who's listening. The idea is, say for example, just to use this one where we're talking about women's political empowerment and leadership, if 20 countries adopt it, and if there are 6 or 9 outcome, like actually I can count here, well I can see in the other page how many outcome indicators there are, and if there are 1, 2, well even if there are 3 or 4 outcome indicators, if those 20 offices maybe pick different ones and there's an even spread in terms of what they pick, there's a possibility not all 20 would pick the same one, but that, 6 might pick the first one, 6 might pick the second one, and so on. So what we're probably going to do, you're quite right, Fumi, and we spotted that actually last week ourselves after the clinic. We probably will try to have at least one outcome level indicator per flagship program initiative, or high level indicator, shall we say, that we will force everybody in the RMS who's implementing a flagship program initiative to take on, so that we can have that. Now, when we make people, like with the strategic plan, when we make people take on an indicator, we always, we're aware of the fact that they may not always have data every year on it, but it's just we need to have a sufficient sample. So that's the way it will work. Now, otherwise, don't forget that also flagship program initiatives are not separate from your program. They're part of your program. They should be, in many cases, as we move forward, at the very heart of your program, and ultimately become all of your program in some cases. So the means through which the progress of your work will continue to be tracked will be, as we had always intended, in terms of strategic notes and AWP monitoring and reporting. The difference that the flagship program is making is that, of course, we at the corporate level and at the regional level, I'm sure too, we will be creating views in the RMS that will pull out specifically the flagship program stuff from the rest of program, and just provide us with some ongoing information in relation to that, in relation to budget and expenditure and information on the indicators. So we'll be able to see the aggregatable stuff, the outcome level indicator that everyone will be using, but also the non-aggregatable stuff we'll also be able to see if we want to look at a particular country context. But bear with us, we're still building it, but please trust that we're going to try and make it as pleasant for everyone as possible. Okay, so question from Juliet Bonafi again. Could you, I hope I'm pronouncing everybody's name correctly, by the way. My apologies if I pronounce any names incorrectly. Could you explain what support we can expect from headquarters to mobilise resources for a national flagship programme? So I'm beginning to think maybe we need to have a resource mobilisation clinic.
Yes, and indeed that's exactly what we plan to do. We planned, these clinics are focusing on planning, because that's the stage that we're at. In addition, we have 2 additional clinics that we'd like to organize. One will be on operationalization and Atlas, because there are changes that are coming in terms of how we use Atlas, and you can start to see those in the presentation that's on the intranet. And the second, or maybe it should be in the reverse order, but the second one is indeed on resource mobilization. So let me come back with a more specific details on that. But I think we could look at maybe early October to organizing a clinic around that. Particular. We may need to think about the format, whether we do it in a clinic format or whether we do it in a different format, and then follow up with clinics to have questions and answers. But indeed, we realize that there is a need for that, and we will be responding to that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Fiona. In the meantime, just one question for my own interest is that if you have a question on resource mobilisation, do you know who, generally speaking, to write to? I mean, outside the context of flagship programmes or clinics or anything else, just even in the normal course of events at any time of the year, when you have a question, do you know who you're supposed to get in touch with to get an answer? So I'd just be interested to know. Okay, so Juliet has another question for you, Fiona. Can you confirm that we can decide the minimum resource mobilisation for a flagship, and we don't have to put down $1 million?
No. The minimum is $1 million. What we said is that, as Shane started off saying, that we want to use common sense, we want to be flexible. So if it's not 1 million on the dot, we're not going to say it's not a flagship program. But the minimum threshold is $1 million. If it's in the ballpark, 100, 200,000, or from that, using common sense and being flexible, that's fine. But I hope that this is not seen as as a way to suddenly go from the 1 million down to 500,000 and so on. I think we really have to keep the objectives and the spirit like you're doing in the planning, like you're not making cosmetic changes in your planning to incorporate the flagship. Similarly, on the resource mobilization side, you have to remember that one of the key objectives of the flagships is to increase the quality and level of our non-core resources. So it has to really be in that spirit. So again, where it can be clear that a country office is really taking this on board to scale up their efforts to mobilize additional resources. If it does not sum up to exactly $1 million, again, using common sense and being flexible, that's fine. But that shouldn't be the way we approach it, and certainly not. We're not saying that the threshold comes down. So I hope that makes sense. If we can just balance being flexible and common sense, if we can balance that with the fact that one of the key objectives of the flagships is to scale up our non-core resource mobilization efforts.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. So I have a question from Anna Karen in Bangkok. Now that project offices or program presences have their own AWPs, though under ORO delegation and oversight, would it be advisable for them to have the same outcome language as their respective regional offices? Or could they keep original AWP outcome language, even if the ROs change their regional outcomes to align with certain flagships? My take on this is that they can keep their original outcome language. I see the work in program presence countries or project offices as being very much, they should be aligned with the national planning context, the national situation. They should be aligned with the UNDAF, and so the results can continue to be unique, so to speak, to that country. So they should have their own outcomes and outputs, which is why we were moving towards them having their own AWPs. It's worth bearing in mind, if you look at it globally, we actually have some program presences or project offices that are much bigger than some of our country offices. So it's just, in some cases, it's just the fact that there isn't a rep there that's the only difference. So they should have their own their own AWPs with their own results. That's the sense we have in headquarters. But again, we're flexible to common sense if you have an argument against that in a particular case. So that would mean that if the ROs change, you don't have to require the others to change. You don't have to require for the regional dimension of the RO programming, you wouldn't require the program presences necessarily to change. Okay, so a question now from Shoko Ishikawa. I think Shoko is in Vietnam. So the question is, 2016 will be our final year of our current strategic notes. So 2016 AWP will be a last for our current strategic note cycle. We would prefer to realign our programming in a major way for the 2017 period onwards and keep changes for 2016 AWP to a minimum. Would this be okay? Well, I don't know the situation exactly of. I think you're in Vietnam, Shoko. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the exact situation in Vietnam. What we're telling every office is that we really can't wait a year to start getting the organisation to move in this direction, because it's not just about office by office, but it's a very much a corporate global effort to change the way we're doing things. So we don't want to tell people that they can take the time. It's very clear in the signalling. Every office is required to look at this. So. There's two things. If you don't have any flagship program initiatives in your program for 2016, what I would expect is that in the review meeting in Bangkok, you would be able to explain, first of all, that you have a healthy management ratio and you didn't need to look at flagship programs as a means to improving your non-core, or you have alternative strategies for raising non-core and improving your management ratio next year. Maybe you have a good management ratio and that's not an issue. I don't know. But secondly, I think you need to be able to say that you looked at the theories of change, and that you looked at the theories of change for the flagship program initiatives, and what was your sense, like what was the reason why you didn't move forward. I think what we're hoping is that every year there will be an increasing number of people who are adopting these flagship program initiatives. The sort of ballpark figure we have set, and that has been set by Yannick, is that in a couple of years, 80% of our program will be in flagship program initiatives. So that's, as you can imagine, that means we're expecting people to start moving in that direction. But I think I don't know, I'm not familiar with the particular context in Vietnam, so I'd suggest, Shoko, that you can write to me and Dan and Monjurul and Fiona, if you like, any combination therein, and we're happy to talk about your particular case, because I can't recall just offhand the dimensions of your program. Okay, but the broad message is everybody is expected to look this year. Okay, a question from Cristiano in Panama. Hi, Cristiano. For planning the income of support costs, XB funds in our strategic notes AWPs to be generated with the mobilization of non-core related to flagship programs, should we continue to use the current division of percentages between headquarters, ORO and CO, or are you planning to use different approaches to different cases? So can I pass that on to you, Letitia? Thanks.
Cristiano, you would have to use the same distributions. You probably are aware that the cost recovery policy is in the process of being revised. I think this will take time, and because the deadlines which we already have for making sure that our strategic notes and annual work plans are finalized is already quite near, so you would need to go ahead and use the existing the distributions of the cost recovery.
Okay, thanks, Letitia. So, question from Fumi in Istanbul. So Fumi asks, based on all the clarifications you have provided in today's clinic and the last clinic, can headquarters prepare a short document to guide the regional PRG members to review the AWPs that integrate the flagship programs? This is just to help the regional PRG members to standardize the way each PRG member looks at the annual work plan and to provide comments particularly on the flagship program components. The current POM Annex for project appraisal and RBM standards in strategic note guidance do not provide those flagship program specific guidance for regional peer review group meetings. Okay, so as I understand that your question for me, what you're saying is that we have our RBM standards that have been sort of distributed to everybody in terms of what represents a quality strategic note and AWP and so on. We also have the kind of project appraisal pack checklist and everything in the POM, which is the standard sort of checklist people can go through when reviewing any project or program. But you're saying that it might be useful to have a separate set of maybe sort of touchstone issues or a checklist or something for the regional PRG members so that they don't miss anything when they're going through these strategic notes and AWPs. So I'm assuming it's the kind of thing we discussed today, where when I said in the PRG you will be asked X, Y, Z. So let me, I'll look into that. I think that, of course it could be done, but we're trying to minimize, I think, the being excessively prescriptive and overly kind of guiding offices. I think that in some cases there's a sense we'd be giving you too much written guidance instead of allowing people really to use their heads and just do it in a smart and sensible way. So I'll check if there's a green light from headquarters also to provide you with something like that. I will do it. But otherwise, what I will say is that Yannick is going to be going to the Africa review meetings. I think Dan is going to Bangkok and Istanbul, and Maria Noel is going to Jerusalem and Brasilia, and I am probably going to Brasilia, Jerusalem, and Nairobi, or wherever the Africa one is going to be. So at each of those meetings, even if there's nothing written down, there will be somebody from headquarters talking to the regional director and talking to you and the planning and coordination specialist and the reps to try and figure out what, to make sure that we're all kind of doing it the same way and that we're all consistent and that we're touching upon all of the correct issues when we're reviewing this and when we're looking at the flagship program initiative integration issue in particular.
Do you want to say something about sharing Moldova?
Okay, well, maybe. Okay. One last thing is we also have an example from Moldova which we got this week. Moldova very kindly volunteered to work, I think, very quickly and effectively to put together a revised strategic note and AWP, integrating flagship program initiatives into their document and into their thinking and their program. So we're going to be working over the next week or so here in headquarters with, I think, with colleagues in the field to try and just make some final touches to that strategic note, AWP, and then we'll be able to send it out as an example also to everybody of how it could look. Because I understand from the retreat that a number of the representatives felt that rather than getting big guidance notes, it's more useful to get an example of what people are doing. So maybe instead of that checklist, it'll just be something like the example of Moldova that everyone can look at and see in real terms what it looks like when an office integrates flagship programs into strategic notes. Okay, so let me see. We have a question now from Elizabeth in Panama. Do you have more exact dates for the headquarters review of country office strategic notes? Okay, so I know that in most cases we want to have them in the first week in November. So what I promised is today we'll follow up and we'll be in touch. We're looking at the possibility of about 9, I think, the first week in November. And then maybe there's one that we'll have to wait until closer to the end of November. And we've already been discussing that with that office. But we're looking at early November. There was a particular request, I think it was either Istanbul or from Bangkok, to have all the strategic notes reviewed in early November so that the strategic notes would be green lit, I should say, before the AWP reviews at the regional level. So that's why we're going to try and do it in early November. It should be very possible because as those of you who've been around for a few years will know, most years we had 57 meetings to kind of coordinate headquarters in November, so 9 or 10 should be an absolute breeze for everybody concerned. So, but we will let you know, and I'll start talking to the regional program advisors here in headquarters, because they're usually the ones who are tasked with just setting up the exact time and date. But just pencil it into your calendars for that first week in November. Okay, so I have a question from Fumi. I think it's on the same thing. Fumi, you say we have not received concrete information for the dates of headquarters PRG and regional PRGs. Who is coming from headquarters? Grateful if headquarters could confirm with Oros soon. Okay, so I think I know when all of the do you have that now or? No, okay. I think we know when all of the I think we know when all the regional ones are. I think Africa maybe we're not entirely sure yet, and we're not entirely sure of the venue, but we know where all the regional ones are taking place. I assume you know where your own regional one is taking place. In terms of headquarters participation, I'll probably go to 3 or maybe 4 of them, and then the senior management in the bureau. In terms of Yannick, Maria Noel, and Dan will go to 2 each. So Dan is doing Istanbul and Bangkok. Maria Noel is doing Jerusalem, which is Arab states, of course, and Brasilia, which I think is where the Latin American Caribbean group will meet, and Yannick will be doing Africa, both Asaro and Wakaro, because there's going to be probably going to be a single Africa meeting rather than 2 separate ones. I think that's still being worked out. But regardless, Yannick will be going to the Africa review meetings. My intention is to go to the Africa ones and probably 2 of the others. So I think if you're saying you need to have that in writing, I can certainly look to having that communicated to you. It would probably be in the form of a message from Maria Noel to the regional directors. I think that would probably be the most appropriate way. And what I'll try to do is maybe we'll tie that in with the communication about when the headquarters PRG meetings are happening. It may not be tomorrow, it may be Monday, because you know what's happening at the GA in New York at the moment, and we have also the Pope here and lots of other people. So it's a little bit hectic in the office and in the city, more broadly speaking. Okay, so any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, so there don't seem to be any other questions coming up. Would any of my colleagues in headquarters like to say any additional things? No?
No, just thank you very much for the questions. They're also helpful for us to understand what the issues are and please feel free again to get in touch if you have any others, or if you feel that there was an answer that didn't fully respond to your question.
Great. Yes, thank you all. And as we've had, again, 31 participants I see online right now. So as it's been so popular and there's clearly such demand for it, we will have another clinic next week. Maybe at 8:30 or 9 rather than at 8, because I know that for some colleagues in the Latin America region, they would like to have them a little bit later. But we'll have another one some morning next week, and I think we're just going to continue to do them until no one shows up anymore. So it's in your hands. Okay, so thank you all, and as my colleague said, any questions, just feel free to write to us. Any comments also on whether you find this clinic useful or not, or things we could do to improve it, please also let us know. We'll certainly be giving feedback, as we did last week. We'll be giving feedback on what we discussed to our bosses here, to Dan and Maria Noel and to Yannick. Okay, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.